Oil in a New Century. Lesson 3, The Progressive Era. Essential questions. How do governments change? How do new ideas change the way people live? Terms to know. A reformer is a person who urges or works for improvement and change. A commission is a form of city government in which citizens elect officials to head departments such as public safety and human services. The mayor has little power. Primary election. An election in which party members choose the party's candidate for the general election. Literacy. The ability to read and write. Attain. To accomplish or achieve something. Conservation. The careful use of natural resources to prevent them from being lost or wasted. Suffrage. The right to vote in political elections. A suffragist is a person advocating the extension of suffrage or the right to vote, especially to women. Progressive reform, guiding question. What impact did the progressives have on Texas in the early 1900s? By the early 1900s, Texans were facing new problems. Many of the reformers who worked to solve these problems were part of the progressive movement. On September 8, 1900, Galveston was struck by a powerful hurricane. Between 6,000 and 8,000 people died during the storm. A third of the city lay in ruins and thousands were homeless. At the time, it was the worst natural disaster in U.S. history. To rebuild the city, Galvestonians formed a new type of city government. They replaced their mayor and city council with a commission form of government. Voters elected 5 commissioners. Each was in charge of a city department, such as police, fire, or water services. Together, they made the laws for the city. Galveston's commission was successful and became a model for other cities. Houston, Denison, El Paso, Greenville, and Dallas adopted the commission form of government a few years later. Progressives believed that voting was necessary for a strong democracy. The Terrell election law, passed in 1905, required major political parties to hold primary elections. These elections let voters, not political insiders, choose candidates. The Terrell election law is still a basic part of election law in Texas today. The progressives also thought that the state school system had to be reformed. The legislature passed a law in 1914 that enabled rural voters to form school districts. A law that required children between the ages of 8 and 14 to attend school at least 60 days a year. In 1918, Annie Webb Blanton was elected Superintendent of Education. She was the first woman to hold statewide office, and she made several more reforms. By 1920, about 75% of children were being educated. In 1920, Texas had the longest school year and the highest literacy rate in the South. Most teachers in urban schools were high school graduates, and about half had college degrees. Almost half of rural teachers, however, had not graduated from any school. For this reason, reform of education in rural areas took much longer to attain. During the Progressive Era, Texans also promoted conservation. Some people worried that the state's forests would soon be destroyed by the lumber industry boom. W. Goodrich Jones led the forest conservation movement that improved Texas forests. Jones convinced lumber companies to replant to ensure future profits. He also called for the conservation of soil, grasses, and wildlife. He encouraged towns and cities to create parks. First, Jones organizes the Texas Forestry Association. Then, the Texas Forest Service was created. After that, lumber companies began replanting. Regulation of Texas businesses weakened in the Progressive period. The Railroad Commission had been formed in the 1890s, partly because populists wished to curb the power of the railroads. In the early 1900s, the commission regulated oil pipelines and the distance between oil wells. But the positive impact of the oil boom on the economy made Texans want to let business run with little state government control. Texas became more business friendly. Women win the vote. Guiding question: how did Texas women win the right to vote? In the early 1900s, many Texas women wanted the right to vote. Rebecca Henry Hayes of Galveston organized the Texas Equal Rights Association. Annette, Elizabeth, and Catherine Finnegan founded a suffrage group in Houston. Minnie Fisher Cunningham of Galveston, president of the Texas Woman Suffrage Association, was a major force in the fight. Opposition was strong. Some argued that women did not need to vote because men protected their rights. Others said that women would neglect their homes and children for politics. Suffragists said that women voters could be more effective caregivers. They could vote for better schools and public health and more playgrounds. From 1915 to 1918, suffragists wrote letters, signed petitions, and lobbied state legislatures. Governor James Ferguson opposed them. In 1917, Ferguson was forced from office for unrelated reasons, and the new governor, William P. Hobby, sympathized with the suffragists. In 1918, they made a deal. If Hobby signed a bill letting women vote in the primary elections, they would vote for him. Hobby agreed, and the suffragist votes helped him win the primary. Hobby also won the general election. He tried to amend the Texas Constitution to give women full voting rights, but that amendment was defeated. In 1920, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution finally granted women full voting rights. Prohibition in Texas. Guiding question: how did Prohibition come to Texas? In Texas during the Progressive era, some reformers argued that alcohol caused many social problems. They said men who spent their money on alcohol forced their families to rely on charity. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, led the national temperance movement. The Texas Anti-Saloon League, formed in 1907, was another voice in the battle to ban alcohol. Some church groups strongly supported these efforts too. The brewing industry was against prohibition or a law banning the sale of alcohol. Many conservatives who disapproved of government interference were also against it. In 1918, however, Texas approved a prohibition law. The next year, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution established prohibition in the United States.